Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. As soon as a team's season ends, their focus immediately shifts towards recruiting. And as we all know, this past Wednesday was National Signing Day, where hundreds of the top high school athletes and junior college athletes in the nation signed with their respective schools. And so what we are going to do is we're going to break down the top 25 classes of 2018 and share where some of these top athletes in the nation decided to sign. And so without further ado, here are your top 25 classes for 2018. And the number one overall class was going to the Georgia Bulldogs. And once again, you have to give credit to head coach Kirby Smart and what he is doing for this Georgia Bulldogs program. Had a kind of a decent year in year one, and then last year took huge strides, led by a great defense, led by a very solid quarterback in Jake Fromm, and then obviously great running backs, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel. Got them to a number one recruiting class here. He's doing some great things. And one of their biggest recruits of this season, of course, was the number one overall recruit in the ESPN 300, Justin Fields, who was a quarterback. So things are really looking good for the future for the Bulldogs. He signed back in December, so that's something to keep your eye on. Obviously, no one really mentioned that on Wednesday, but he did sign in December, the number one recruit in the ESPN 300. So that is huge for the Bulldogs. They also signed cornerback Tyson Campbell, who I believe was number 9 in the ESPN 300. So obviously they're number one for a reason, and that's because they were getting some of the top players in the nation. So things are really looking good for the future for the Georgia Bulldogs. Something that will keep them as contenders in the SEC and contenders nationally if they can keep this up. So a great job for Kirby Smart. And a great recruiting class for the Bulldogs. Now, right behind them follows Ohio State, Texas, USC, Penn State to round out the top 5. All very historically good schools, contenders just about every year. Give credit to Tom Herman, what he's doing in year 2, getting a top 3 recruiting class. Texas usually has fairly good recruiting class regardless, but what he did last year, getting Texas back to a bowl game, winning that bowl game against Missouri, things are really pointing out for the Longhorns, especially with this number 3 ranking here. They also signed 18 players from the ESPN 300. So that is huge for the Longhorns. And like I said, with Georgia, things are really starting to trend up for the Longhorns in the years to come. One point that a lot of people have started to make here is that this is the first time in a decade that Alabama has failed to finish with a top 3 recruiting class. Now, they are number 7, still very good. A lot of schools wish they were this good to be able to finish in the top 10. But this is a little bit of a drop-off for Alabama. They still were able to get the number 5 overall recruit in the ESPN 300 and cornerback Patrick Surtain Jr. So, very good for them. He was the top player left Wednesday during National Signing Day, and he was able to commit to the Crimson Tide, which is a huge get for them to bolster up that defense and hopefully make another run for a national championship. So, you know, people were freaking out. They didn't finish in the top 3, even didn't finish number 1, but things are still looking pretty good for the Crimson Tide. I would not be too worried. Now, one thing that I did find very interesting here was Ohio State sitting at number 2. Listen to some of the recruits they got. They did sign 17 recruits from the ESPN 300. Still a very solid recruiting class. They got the best offensive tackle, Nicholas Petit-Frere. They also got the number 1 defensive tackle in Teron Vincent, number 1 tight end Jeremy Ruckert, and the number 1 center in Matthew Jones. So, look at that. That's 4 number 1s in their respective categories that Ohio State was able to sign. Obviously, they will all be in the top 3 ESPN 300. Take those 4 away. That's still 13 ESPN 300 recruits that Ohio State was able to sign. So things are, of course, looking good. We know how good of a recruiter Urban Meyer is. So there were cause for concerns of what was going to happen with Ohio State this year now that JT Barrett was gone. But they're able to bolster up that offensive line. The defense should be able to cover some stuff up. You get Teron Vincent. And the bigger question is, will some of these guys make an impact in their first year, or will they redshirt? I expect some of these guys to make an impact. A lot of these guys in the top ESPN 300 to come in and make an immediate impact. So I'm really excited to watch them. And one thing, you know, we really don't think about this right now, but these guys that signed on Wednesday and for the next couple days, or even back in the early signing period in December, these guys are the future of college football. We have all our fan favorites right now, but every year, you know, the guys that signed, guys that are in the ESPN 300, they are the future. These guys could be potential Heisman winners or potential MVPs of the national championship, leading their respective schools to greatness. So that's something we got to look at. I always, think that's crazy when they release, recruiting rankings for 2020, 2022, way down the road, but it's real. It's something we do have to keep our eye out for, but it's also a very, very exciting time. So I'm really excited to see what these athletes have to do for us in the upcoming years. So that rounds out Ohio State. One thing I'd like to point out is new coaches. How did they do in their first year recruiting, and especially if they didn't have a lot of time to recruit? Now, if you go to a very big-name school, regardless of who the coach is, you're going to end up having a fairly good recruiting class. It's just because of the history, the tradition, the track record, and all that good stuff. But we'll look here down at Florida State. Willie Taggart moving over from Oregon to Florida State, getting a number 11 in the recruiting class. Obviously, that's not bad at all. Still very solid, right outside the top 10, but Florida State used to having very high recruiting classes, probably in the top 5, top 8 around there, but it's not a bad first recruiting class for Willie Taggart by any means at all. Also, first-year head coaches at their new schools, Florida and Dan Mullen. He's obviously, we all know, very adept at recruiting in the SEC, so switching over from the SEC West to the SEC East, he's become a fan favorite, and Florida was a fan favorite there back when he was a coordinator, so he's been able to do very good, getting Georgia up to number 14 in the recruiting rankings. Oregon, Mario Cristobal, taking over for Willie Taggart after he left after only 1 year at Oregon, getting them to number 16. Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, 17. Chip Kelly at 18 with UCLA. So if you look there, you've got Florida here in a stretch of 3 straight schools, Oregon, Texas A&M, and UCLA, with brand new coaches that have finished in the top 25. So that is very impressive, I would say. Tennessee finishing at 20th, new head coach Jeremy Pruitt. I expect big things out of him in the near future. Probably not right off the bat, but still, a top 20 finish in the National Signing Day rankings is not bad for that first-year head coach. Something to really look forward to. Another first-year head coach that finished in the top 25, Nebraska, Scott Frost, doing a great job here. Remember, he was balancing preparing UCF for that bowl game against Auburn and also recruiting for Nebraska, because we all knew he was going to take this job. So, as a first-year head coach, or as a first-year head coach going into at Nebraska, is not a bad recruiting class, finishing at 22nd. So that's something to look forward to for the Cornhuskers. So that's going to be very fun to see how Scott Frost, if he can rejuvenate this Cornhuskers team and get Nebraska back to their winning ways. One thing I did think was funny, if you haven't seen some of the videos of these guys signing, choosing where they're going to go to school, check out Florida's Jacob Copeland, the number 40 overall player in the ESPN 300, a very solid and talented wide receiver. If you didn't see that, his mom was decked out in Alabama and Tennessee gear, and then he signed with Florida, put on the Florida hat, and she walked away. Now, of course, she ended up coming back to support her son, but always that's very funny. They usually happen just about every year where the player signs, but the family does not want them to go. So that was always a funny video. So go check those out if you haven't seen that. But Florida did pick up a very solid wide receiver in Copeland. Something to look forward to under Dan Mullen's offense, as we all know, will be very fast-paced and throwing a lot more passing, and should rejuvenate the offense that Jim McElwain was just never able to get going with the Gators. Clemson sitting here at number 6, had some great years with under Dabo Swinney, should be another contender for the college football playoff again this year. Number 2 overall prospect in the ESPN 300, quarterback Trevor Lawrence, as we saw that it was between him and Justin Fields, but he was the number 2 overall in the ESPN 300 and number 2 quarterback right behind Fields. Number 4 overall player in the ESPN 100, defensive end Xavier Thomas, and the number 6 overall player in the ESPN 300, defensive end KJ Henry. So 2, 4, and 6 all went to Clemson. 2 of those on the defensive side of the ball to bolster what was another great front 7 from last year. Should be another good one in the years to come for the Tigers. And 2 teams not listed here in the top 25 that were still able to get some solid recruits. Stanford got 2 solid quarterbacks. Tanner McKee, the number 76 overall player in the ESPN 300, but he will not be able to play until 2020. He's doing a religious mission trip for the first 2 years, so he will be able to come and play eligible in 2020. They also got the number 100 overall player in the ESPN 300, another quarterback, and Jack West. So they should be set at the quarterback position for a couple more years. Something to look forward to for Stanford. And Arizona State, first-year head coach Herm Edwards coming out of retirement, hasn't coached forever. As you know, he would coach a lot in the NFL. But coming over to take over with Arizona State, got safety Ashari Crosswell, the number 111th player in the ESPN 300. That's the highest ranked defender to go to Arizona State since 2014. So that is something to look forward to for all these players, all these respective schools and players. Like I said, these guys are the future of college football. These are the guys we're going to be watching for years to come. They'll be able to go to these schools, develop in their first year, second year, and then end up becoming, hopefully, dominant players that are all going to excite us and excite these fan bases. So these are your top 25 classes for National Signing Day. We pointed out some of where the new head coaches and how they're going to do with these teams. Obviously, very solid recruiting classes. Virginia Tech, TCU rounding out the top 25, but the top 5, top 10 are always the most important, always the most interesting to look at to see, because those are usually where the top recruits head, and we saw those. Georgia one spot. Success should be there for years to come, of course, staying a dominant threat, not only in the SEC, but on the national stage as well. So I'm very excited to see how these players do in the future and how these teams fare in the future as well. Keep your eye out for more videos coming soon, coaching changes, and anything else in the college football world that just happens over these next few weeks. And, of course, in June, we start back with our preseason predictions. So thank you for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Gridiron Expert.